Rainbow Six Siege has been around for almost 10 years now, and it's safe to say that the game has a pretty extensive history up to this point. As the best Siege players have come and gone over the years, these prodigies have cemented their legacies into this game. In this video, we're going to specifically talk about Shaiiko, Beaulo, Pengu, Spoit, and Stompn, and then we'll decide who had the most hype during their time and who ended up being the GOAT of Rainbow Six Siege. Now we're going to start off with Stompn because he's going to be the most difficult one to talk about, I think. He's currently in the midst of being Rainbow Six Siege's next prodigy, so having him in this discussion with guys who have already created their legacies is going to cause Stompn to have just a few asterisks next to his name, but that's not to take away from him at all, because he might be the most hyped prospective Pro League player out of this entire list, just depending on who you ask. So Stompn actually started streaming in the beginning of 2021, and he was featured in his first Jinxie stream in a 1v1 later that year, and quickly began rising to the top as one of the best controller players in all of Siege. His fame continued to grow exponentially with each appearance on Jinxie streams, and as he continued to get praise from the pro community. Stompn put his skill on display for the world to see in Jinxie's roller tournaments in 2024, where he began to make a name for himself in more than just an Oregon 1v1 context, but in a potential pro team setting. In this past December, Stompn played in his first PC competitive tournaments, where his team Bands Coast lost to some of the best in the game like Gunner, but then they destroyed the competition against these teams which I've never heard of, but Goon City, Syntax, and Prospects, and Stompn performed very well. You know, it's competitive PC games, so despite not knowing who those teams even are, I mean, it's really good nonetheless. He also dropped 19 kills against another semi-pro team in a scrim, which is just ridiculous that he's able to make this transition so smoothly, which is why a lot of people believe he will be successful in Pro League. Obviously, these are all tournaments and teams that are, you know, adjacent but still inferior to your tier 1 Pro League kind of thing, closer to tier 3, I guess, but this is how you get your start, you know, and the fact that Stompn has already began making a name for himself in this elevated stage of the game just says everything you need to know about Siege's next prodigy. Stompn and the rest of the console players created the most viewed T3 games ever, which is invaluable for the exposure and brand of Siege, and you'll see that it's a very common, you know, denominator between a lot of these guys on this list. They bring in a lot of viewership because people want to see these prodigies in action. So it seems like Stompn will most likely plan to continue to play in these tournaments and move on to the Challenger Series in the spring, and then potentially get promoted to Pro League in the summer, which would be perfect timing because Stompn would no longer be 17 and he could actually go pro. Now Stompn definitely has some pretty big hurdles here to live up to his hype, and I'm not saying he's a definite lock for Pro League by any means, but he has overcome all challenges of his Siege career thus far and exceeded all expectations. Stompn has the attention of the entire Siege player base and also the weight of the console community on his shoulders, which certainly fits the requirements needed to be a prodigy. And right now, the sky is the limit for this kid. Now let's talk about Shaiiko, the man that many would consider to be the greatest European player in Siege history, and even many more may consider to be the outright GOAT of Siege, regardless of region. Shaiiko began playing in the Challenger League in 2017, where he quickly grabbed the attention of the pro scene that he was simply built different. Shaiiko and his team B Genius would go on to join Pro League and dominate their first game, with Shaiiko demonstrating why he is already one of the best fraggers in Siege. Shaiiko rose to the top so quickly and became an icon, and with this comes a lot of skepticism in the pro scene. He would eventually be reported for cheating, specifically the use of a macro, and he would be banned from Pro League later on in 2017. Shaiiko held his ground though, and he claimed that the accusations were false, but he would still go on to serve a 1.5 year long suspension where he continued perfecting his craft and would return to Pro League for BDS in 2019, where he picked up right where he left off. In his first LAN match, he actually broke the kill record of 24, which just goes to show how insane this dude really was. He took almost 2 years off and then came back in a LAN match and broke the kill record, and obviously since it is a LAN match, there was no possibility of him cheating, so in the process, he also proved all of his haters and accusers wrong. Shaiiko has won numerous tournaments and MVPs since then, and although the truth as to if he was really cheating in 2017 remains unanswered, there's no question that he is, regardless, one of the greatest Siege players of all time, and certainly lived up to his hype. Although Shaiiko probably is the best player on this list, and his hype was certainly insanely high, there's still another guy on this list that outshines Shaiiko in terms of the hype around them as a prodigy. But we're going to talk about him last. And oh, by the way, the player that reported Shaiiko for cheating was none other than Pengu. Let's talk about him next. Pengu got his start on Penta, which is already a very well-known esports team, so this gave him a leg up on someone like Shaiiko, who started from the bottom and had to make his way up to the top. But this also meant that Pengu would be thrown right into the best competition that Siege has. He struggled for a while mechanically since he didn't have an FPS background like other players, which made him rely on his pure game sense, strategy, and reaction time, which actually gave him an advantage over a lot of players. He created his own playstyle with this approach to the game and would help pave the way for Penta to win multiple events and tournaments, becoming one of the powerhouses of Siege Pro League. Specifically, they would be in the 6th Invitational in 2018, where Pengu would clutch a 1v2 to win it all, becoming one of the defining moments of his legacy. G2 would eventually buy out Penta, which only made Pengu and his team even better with more resources and more money, and after a while, basically they became a dynasty in Pro League, considering how much they were winning, and Pengu was viewed by most people as the best current player in Siege at this time. And whether you think he truly is the best player in Siege's history, there's certainly no denying that he is the winningest Pro League player ever, and was essentially Steph Curry while G2 was the 2016 Warriors. Now if that's not greatness, I don't know what is. Now we're going to talk about a guy who is not retired and is still early on in his career, yet has absolutely made an argument for himself as one of the greatest to ever do it already, and that is none other than the man himself, Spoit. Spoit has a bit of a different story compared to the other people on this list. Granted, it is still an unfinished story, but he really started making a name for himself through content creation rather than Pro League. He started playing the game when he was 13 and quickly became one of the best considering his extensive background with FPS games from a young age. Eventually, his content would begin raising questions about his legitimacy, and his account would get banned by Ubisoft because of suspicions of cheating. He eventually got his account back, but his reputation had taken a massive hit, and the Siege community was not sold on Spoit being a legit player with no help from a macro. Spoit kept pushing on through content until he turned legal age to go pro, where he signed with Rogue despite having offers from the biggest and best teams in all of Siege esports. But Spoit would go on to lead this unexperienced team to win the major, and he also solidified himself as not only one of the best young players, but one of the best overall players in all of Pro League. He is still actively playing in Pro League and has been blowing up on YouTube, Twitch, and TikTok as he has begun letting his personality out on top of his absolutely cracked playstyle, which I respect because most players do Pro League for a while before making the full switch to content creation, so it's incredibly impressive that Spoit has excelled and been able to be dominant in both respects. Last but not least, let's talk about Beaulo. Beaulo was no doubt the most insane prodigy on this list in terms of hype. The way people described him before he made his Pro League debut was essentially godlike, and of course the cheating allegations came with this, which is a tale that's all too familiar with all of these players on this list, but that just comes with the territory of being a prodigy, of being this good at Siege. And no question about it, Beaulo was exactly that. He caught the attention of pros quickly through his YouTube videos and was signed by TSM when he turned 18. He had a bit of a slow start to his pro career with some tough losses, most notably to Pengu and G2, but eventually TSM would win in Montreal, and Beaulo even won the MVP award. So he was finally living up to the insane hype that was all around him. And also, he brought a pretty ridiculous viewership spike to Pro League and really just had all eyes on him. After Beaulo and TSM won the 6th Invitational, he announced his retirement from the competitive scene as he had achieved just about everything he wanted to and already created not only a name, but an entire legacy for himself as one of the best in such a short amount of time. Overall, I would say the GOAT of Siege prodigies has to either go to Beaulo or Shaiiko. I could see the argument for Pengu too because he's won so much, but I think that both of these players are just levels ahead of the competition. Spoit could definitely sneak in there if he keeps playing at the rate he's playing at, and it's way too early to tell with Stompn since he's still in the formative stages of his career, but the beauty of Pro League is that the scene is always changing and you never know who the next GOAT may be. Who do you guys think is the greatest Siege prodigy? Let me know down in the comments, and thanks so much for watching. Peace.